Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to be talking about Kill Your Darling by Clay McLeod Chapman. I recently picked this up at Little Ghost Books in Toronto, Canada. Little Ghost Books is probably one of my favorite bookstores ever, apart from like the Strand in New York City and Browse About Books in Rehoboth Beach. I love this store. It is all horror, and it is fully indie run, and it gets a lot of like amazing printings of things that you normally don't see in like Barnes & Noble, and whenever I am there I just go and I spend a ton of money and fill my suitcase with all of these books so that I don't have to order them off Amazon. And last time I was there I saw this, which was a, I believe, 2024 release from Clay McLeod Chapman. It's not his most recent release. That was Stay on the Line. That's his 2025 release. I do have it in my TBR pile and I will be reading that very, very soon. But if you are not familiar with Clay McLeod Chapman, he is one of those authors that I have almost like a Stephen Graham Jones relationship with, where I have read books from him that I love, and I've read books from him that I've been like, I'm sorry, what is this? But I really recognize the value in his prose and in his stories, so I always try and pick up his latest releases. For example, I think he's probably best known at this point for Ghost Eaters. It's a story about addiction, and like this idea of using mushrooms to be able to talk with your deceased loved ones. And it's an analogy for addiction, and it's a really, really bleak and devastating book. It's very, very hard to read in my opinion. I did not enjoy reading it. I did not like the book. But I understand the purpose of it. I understand why it was so well received. I understand why so many people adore it. Not my thing. However, he then released a novel called What Kind of Mother, which is absolutely bonkers and bizarre and strange. And I really don't know how to describe it apart from the fact that What Kind of Mother is like probably not the best title for that book. And I loved it. And I loved his weird, wacky horror, and as strange and bleak and bizarre as it was, I couldn't put that book down. So he's definitely one of those authors that I keep reading regardless of my final feelings of his books, because I do think that he has very, very interesting and unique ideas, which is exactly how I feel about Kill Your Darling. I'm going to read the back of this book for you. Rule 1, write what you know. This is what Glenn Partridge knows. The battered body of his 15-year-old son, Billy, was discovered in a vacant lot nearly 40 years ago. The police are still no closer to finding the murderer decades later. It haunts him. That all starts to change after his long-suffering wife signs him up for an amateur fiction writing workshop at the local library. As he writes the book of Billy, Glenn begins to make sense of the senseless crime that took his son and sees a chance to receive the fictional closure life never provided. But as Glenn's story takes on a life of its own, the cold case heats up again. Someone from Billy's past comes out of hiding before he reaches the end. Okay. There's a lot to unpack with this book, and she's very short. She's only about 200 pages, and she's very intense. This is not for the faint of heart. I wouldn't say that it's like extreme horror, but it's definitely inspired by a real case, and a real father trying to hunt down, the unsolved murder of his child. So know that. The actual like discovery of Billy, and like the coroner's report is really, really devastating, and was really difficult for me to read. It's very graphic. It's very traumatic, and it's a lot. The story is really interesting because it kind of borderlines this, like imitation true crime moment, kind of like Becoming the Boogeyman with Richard Shizmar. There's a lot of these kind of true crimey detective elements in this story, told from the perspective of somebody who is not directly handling the case. There's a lot of grief. There's a lot of soul to this book. There's a lot of misguided projection from a lot of our main characters. It's a very depressing read. It's a very, very, very depressing read. And it's also a very interesting read. At the end of the day, it is kind of this like whodunit mystery, but it's done in this very elevated, eloquent way of somebody also basically coming face to face with their grief and probably doing it in what should be seen as something very healthy, but taking it to the extremes and doing it in a way that is not so healthy. And so while it was very difficult for me to read the first half, and I was definitely like on board with where Clay McLeod Chapman was going, I do think it became a little bit more fantastic and fictionalized in the latter half. So that first half is very, very brutal and very hard to read. You can really feel how much it is rooted in true events, and inspired by true events. And then the next half of the novel is kind of where you get a lot of this artistic liberty that Clay McLeod Chapman takes. And while it makes a really intriguing message and point, I don't know if it matches the tone of the beginning of the book, because I don't think Chapman actually ended up saying exactly what he wanted to say in a way that was accessible for the reader. And this is like, not really a spoiler, but just kind of a direction of the story. You do find out, there is a reveal of what happens. The mystery is solved, and I think that's where I have a lot of my hesitations with the novel. Our narrator is a very unreliable narrator. He kind of goes in and out of telling a story versus going on his own opinionated tangents to the reader, and it's very hard to kind of differentiate where we are in his psyche, and I think that is intentional. However, when we get to the conclusion and we get to the big reveal, a lot of plot holes popped up for me, and I wasn't sure if those were intentionally placed there to continue on this level of unreliability. And again, a lot of the people that we're dealing with are very unreliable narrators, and definitely all have reasons to hide things. But it just didn't quite make sense to me. A lot of Billy's actions, the way that his father rationalizes them, did make sense, as a father's rationalization would. But again, we only know Billy through his father's eyes. And then we get another perspective on what happened, again, told from somebody who is unreliable. And we see a different side of Billy. And for me, that was also riddled with plot holes and didn't quite make sense. So I struggled to feel connected to the end of the book, because I just wasn't sure what the message of this usage of grief and an unreliable narrator was leading to, with all of these kind of open-ended moments that just didn't quite add up and make sense to me. There was also a bunch of moments where I just felt like Chapman's main character, Billy's father, Glenn, was really repetitive, and I wasn't sure if that was just like intentional and like a stylistic choice, or if it was just poor editing. And I feel like that should never be where you're sitting. You're like, oh, it's so redundant and repetitive. Is this intentional? Like, you shouldn't have to ask yourself that. It should either feel intentional and purposeful and add to the story, or it shouldn't be there. And so that was definitely something that kind of took me out of reading this story. I also don't find many of our characters likable. If any of them. They all have a lot of flaws, they all have a lot of arrogance, they all have a lot of trauma they need to work through, and bottled up emotions, and deeply rooted like stages of grief that are manifesting over and over and over again in different ways over these 40 years. And so it was hard for me to connect with them. I could definitely sympathize with them, because what they're going through is truly so horrific. But I did struggle to like any of our main characters. And then, of course, we get to the reveal, which I'm not going to ruin here, because I do think it is worth reading the novel and navigating to get there. But the reveal to me was very underwhelming. I do wonder, I haven't actually looked into the real case, because to be perfectly honest, I was really kind of bogged down by how depressing this fictional case is, and I didn't know if I had the stomach to read about the case that it was inspired by. Maybe I'll do that after this video. But I just found the reveal to be kind of obvious and cliche, and the fact that it is obvious. Opens up another dialogue that I think Clay McLeod Chapman is creating with this story of kind of like small towns protect their own kind of thing. And for me, that's a very interesting statement to say, and it's definitely something that's definitely worth looking into, and it's like something that throughout history we can see happens, and it is also very much something that happens quite a lot in horror. But it was something that I really wish had been really more pivotal to the plot and not just kind of this like throwaway aside. Had it been more poignant to the plot and like really led as like a key motivator for so many of the people that interact with Billy and with Billy's dad, I feel like I would have bought it more, but it just kind of felt like a brushed aside factor for like Clay McLeod Chapman to be like, well, nobody could solve it because small towns protect their own, don't you know? And then just move on. So yes, there is a lot of really interesting, strange ideas in this. This talks very deeply about the psychotic breaking of living with such a heavy amount of grief and how unhealthy obsessions can come about. It talks greatly about how writing can be a release. And I really like how most of this is kind of done in almost this like journalistic style where you feel like you were reading like diary entries and trains of thought inside of our main character's head. And I thought that was really, really brilliant. And how solving this mystery can come out of writing it all down and the extremes that one person will go to and how that manifests within the brain, and how much grief the brain can take. I think that there are so many really cool and interesting ideas in this story. I just don't think the ending lived up to how interesting of a concept everything else was that laid the groundwork to get to this conclusion. So not my favorite thing from Clay McLeod Chapman. It was a 3-star read. I'm really still glad I read it, and it is very heavy and it is very dark, and it is very much Clay McLeod Chapman's style of prose and thinking and messaging. I just think it should have either been longer and more refined or really, really toned down and hyper-focused on exactly what message Clay McLeod Chapman wanted to say. I think the length being right in that like sweet spot of not a novella but not like a long-form novel kind of hurt this story. And I know I say that about a lot of books, but it's definitely something where I either needed more or I needed less, and I'm not actually sure which one that is. But definitely worth picking up if you are a fan of Clay McLeod Chapman. Especially, like, if you liked Ghost Eaters, you will definitely like this. And if you liked What Kind of Mother, you will definitely like this. And if you liked Whisper Down the Lane, you will definitely enjoy this. Like, it is very much a pinnacle Clay McLeod Chapman style story. Kind of pulls together all of those weird, funky, grief-driven, bizarre, experimental things that we get from a lot of his work, and does them in just a like truly kind of scary and depressing manner, and worth reading if you like Chapman as an author. I feel like people who like Ghost Eaters will probably like this more than people who like What Kind of Mother. I will say that though. Anyways, that is all that I have for today. As always, I am trying to post every Monday and Thursday again. Fingers crossed. And if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you all in the next one. Mwah!